which I'll put a link to in the chat now.
I'm sorry, Robert, can I interrupt you? I forgot to mention I am recording this session, so if you don't want your image to be seen in the video or your name, please change your name and turn your camera off. Thank you. Sorry about that.
No problem. Yeah, so I've just put a link into the chat. So if you want to go and watch the video, it's there now for you to watch. If you would prefer to just hang around and listen to us kind of give a brief summary of what we're talking about, then that's what we're going to be doing now. After we give our brief summary, we'll throw up some questions, and then we can have kind of a discussion with everyone in the room. So if we just maybe start by briefly introducing ourselves. I'm Robert Lowe.
I'm Matt Schaefer.
And Matt Turner unfortunately can't be with us because he's busy doing a thing. So the title of the presentation is Teacher Development Through Podcast Engagement. And I think we're going to start off by just kind of summarizing the talk. So Matt, do you want to begin with that?
Yeah, sure. I guess maybe, I mean, should we first sort of ask or check who's going off to watch the video and who's staying to?
Okay.
Or who's already watched the video?
Has anyone already watched the video from the audience? That's one.
Okay, sure, go. Okay, so then I guess we'll assume the other two are watching the video now.
Sorry, I just entered, so I don't see the link.
Oh, I'll copy it back into the chat. Just a second. Here you are. Here's the link. Can you see that now?
Yes.
Okay, great.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay, so let's see, just to sort of, I guess, to summarize what we looked at. So at the beginning of the video, I guess the idea was first to talk about what podcasts are, but that was sort of, I guess the intention there was for, we have given presentations in the past on our podcast and what we do. And in the past, we've always had one or two people in the audience.
You've muted yourself, Matt.
Sorry, was I mute the whole time?
No.
Okay.
You said one or two people in the audience.
Oh, right. I don't know how that happened. Okay. But yeah, one or two people in the audience will raise their hand and ask, what is a podcast? It's good when they ask at the beginning. It's kind of awkward when they wait to the end. So a podcast is, for the people who don't know what a podcast is, I guess, it is, so I'm looking at
You're learning yourself for the first time. Right.
Yeah, I'm trying to figure out what is a podcast. Let me see what Matt said. Did he say? Okay, so I don't know. We gave a quote in the video. I don't know whose quote it was. It might have been Matt Turner himself quoting. But a user-generated audio creation that's uploaded to a hosting website and delivered to listeners' smartphones, laptops, and tablets. What I always say is, I mean, sometimes I start by just saying it's kind of like a radio show, but it's basically a recording it's usually a recording, right, of people talking about a topic. And there's very formal ones, it might just be pulled from an existing radio show, or sometimes they're pulled from, news programs, or it might be very informal and very amateur. It might just be a couple of friends in a room who sit down to record themselves talking. They record it and they upload it to a podcast hosting website. And I guess ours was more on the informal side. It basically started just the three of us sitting in a room, recording what we were talking about and uploading it.
Yeah, that's right. So our podcast is called the Teflology Podcast. We started it in 2014, and we're still producing episodes now. And originally it was just kind of a way for us to sort of capture some of the energy of our pub chats about language teaching. But it's developed into much more of an important part of our professional development. And that's kind of what we're going to be talking about today, and what we talked about in the video, how, our podcasting has influenced our professional development in various ways. So I don't think we need to go into too much detail, but there's been some research, like an increasing amount of research into podcasts in various fields, not in language teaching particularly. I think we're sort of we're leading the way there, but in other fields, there's been quite a lot of research into podcasts. So people have claimed that podcasts offer alternative modes of knowledge production. So when people are, podcasting, they're kind of creating knowledge between themselves. It's kind of co-constructed knowledge. And they offer like a new way of disseminating information or research findings. So normally when you are, like researching a topic, you have to read like books or academic papers, which are sometimes very impenetrable. Whereas with podcasts, it's much more freely available, and people can kind of, download a podcast very easily, listen to it on their commute, and sort of engage with research or new ideas in that way. So there's been quite a lot of research into how podcasts are used to disseminate knowledge. It's also been used in terms of reflection. Matt, do you want to briefly talk about
that? Sure. Yeah. So I guess we would argue that podcast is a form of online reflective practice. And Rob, I think you're going to go into a bit more detail about this, right?
Yeah.
But basically it's online, so it's public, which is important. It allows for dialogic reflection. So the way we do it, there's 3 of us. And so obviously the interaction between us helps us reflect. Obviously reflection can be individual, but in our case, it's through our interactions, through our dialogues, that our reflection sort of takes place. And it helps to create and contribute to communities of practice. So obviously there's the 3 of us, but we're sort of engaged in a dialogue with the audience. And that dialogue also extends to outside the podcast, to things like social media.
Yeah. So I'll give a little bit more detail now about the ways that we've used podcasts, or producing a podcast ourselves as a part of like our reflection and our professional development. So the way that our podcast is structured is that we have 3 presenters, and we each go away and prepare a topic each week. So we have 3 topics per episode, and so to do that, we end up having to kind of research things which we're not that familiar with, and we've called these mini research projects, right? We have like a week or 2 weeks, and we go away and we come up with a topic that we want to speak about on the podcast, and then we have to go and read books and articles and learn about the topic so that we are well informed enough to discuss it on the podcast. And so that in itself is quite an important part of our development. Like it pushes us to investigate areas that otherwise we would never have maybe looked into. So having the podcast with the deadline every 2 weeks is a really important spur for us to go away and look into new topics. We also have in the podcast not just one person speaking, but a dialogue between the 3 of us, and we call this critical co-presenterships. This is the relationship that we have with each other. So when we are presenting on our topic, we're often, interrupting each other and challenging each other and going back and forth about concepts and kind of coming to new understandings of the concepts based on our experience. As I said, one person is kind of the informant. One person is the informant on each topic, and the other 2 are kind of like the voice of the audience. So they're asking questions and trying to get closer to an understanding of the topic. So through that kind of interaction, we end up developing new understandings of the concept. So you have the mini research projects, and then in the process of recording the podcast, we have those critical co-presenterships, where we start to reflect on and co-construct an understanding of the topic. And then finally, we have a third stage, which is when the audience gets in touch with us about what we've said. So on several occasions, members of the audience have got in touch and said, you were talking about this. That's a thing that I know about. And, you know, you missed this, or maybe you'd like to consider this. And so, again, we have a third level of reflection coming into the process of producing the podcasts. So that's like one key way that we use podcasts for active reflection. We also use podcasts for research activities, particularly. So one thing that we started doing right back at the beginning of the podcast was interviewing kind of well-known figures in the field. We've spoken to people like Rod Ellis, Henry Widowson, Barbara Zeidelhofer, and so on. And you know, we talk to them about their research, and again, for us, that's kind of a research activity because we're learning about a research area. And also, we've heard from our interviewees that it's quite useful for them in helping them to sort of rethink their ideas in the moment. You know, so podcasts kind of contribute to you know, our research engagement, I guess you could say, in that way. Another way that podcasts figure into research activities is through kind of, as I said before, new ways of disseminating knowledge. So, you know, an academic paper is often quite forbidding. It's quite, you know, imposing, and not very friendly to people who don't make a habit of reading dense academic text. But if you produce a sort of podcast version of a paper, then that's, you know, a much more open way of sharing your research. We did that with a paper that I published with one of my colleagues, which was a duoethnography, so it was already dialogic, and we kind of performed the duoethnography in the podcast. So it was, you know, a kind of an experiment in academic listening, I guess you could say. I think Matt Turner is also very interested in the idea of papers being the podcast themselves. He points to examples of papers which have been published where the paper itself, the printed paper, is just a link to an audio file, which is the actual content, where people are actually speaking and, you know, presenting their research in that way. So that's another way that, you know, podcasts can be used for research activities. The final kind of benefit for us in terms of professional development is to do with creating and connecting with a community of listeners. So, you know, we've been podcasting kind of independently for a while, but just a couple of years after we started, people began to approach us at conferences and say, "Are you the Teflology guys?" I think once it was just on the basis of hearing our voices. You know, they recognized our voices while we were sitting and chatting at a conference, and that's helped us to kind of widen our professional circle and our social circle in ELT in Japan in particular. And you know, that's kind of fed back into the creation of the podcast, because, you know, people that we know now through the podcast will say, "Hey, I was listening to your episode the other day and I had some thoughts about it." So, you know, we have these new voices coming into the podcast and sort of helping us again to kind of reconsider our ideas. So those are some of the sort of the key ways that producing the podcast has helped us to develop professionally and reflect on our practice and on our beliefs. Yeah, so I'll hand over to Matt for the next section.
Okay, so for the next section, I sort of looked at it at the other side. So I think what Rob was focusing on was engaging with podcasts as somebody who produces the podcasts. But this sort of also helped us consider how the listeners, the audience to the podcast, might also engage with it. So I think in the video, the first thing I talked about is just you know, treating a podcast as a text, like Rob said. You know, there's the possibility of even sort of publishing, so to speak, an audio text as a piece of research. And so just thinking about some of the differences between spoken texts and sort of more traditional written texts. And we thought that obviously you know, it's much easier or more common, I guess, to present a spoken text as something dialogic. It's, again, this is all just sort of our ideas. It's anecdotal at this point, but the feeling we get is that a spoken text would be more dynamic than a written text, more accessible. Often podcasts are, for the most part, entirely free, whereas a lot of academic written texts, you might need a subscription to a journal. I think they can be more approachable, just by the nature of spoken text versus written text. They tend to be less academic, less dense, less reliant on specialist knowledge. And again, that the dialogic aspect means that when that specialist knowledge does arise, if one of the three of us knows less about that area than the others, which often happens, we can sort of negotiate and talk through the meaning of it. Can also be more exploratory. So obviously it's something less fixed, and we can maybe we just have a topic that we're starting with, but that we can allow our dialogue to take us in different directions. Simple things like it's portable. You can obviously many people listen to podcasts by putting them on their smartphones and listening to them as they're going to work, as they're washing dishes, etc. Let's see. So considering that podcasts can be treated as a spoken text, we thought that just like a written text, podcasts can be used as an informal professional development resource. And simple ways of doing that would just be, look for, go to a podcast repository, look for an interest that a topic that you're interested in exploring, and you're very likely to find something, to be honest. In the video, I sort of gave an example of, I think it was CLIL. Yeah, I just sort of putting CLIL, which is an area I'm interested in, into the search of iTunes, and it comes up with a bunch of different podcast episodes dealing with that topic. Obviously, it can lead to follow-up reading, and it can also lead to just discussing podcast episodes with peers and colleagues. Again, on social media, that tends to happen. We try to be, somewhat present on social media, and that has led to discussions about things that we've talked about, sometimes very critical, which is fine, and which we're very much open to, about the things we say. Sort of more formally, again, I think it can be used, podcast can be used as a more formal text. So just like you would in a sort of inset session, or if you're doing teacher training, I think basically almost just like you would use it as a written text. You could have pre-listening and post-listening discussion questions. So give a group of teachers some sort of topic questions to discuss, have them listen to a podcast episode or a section of a podcast episode, and then discuss afterwards what they thought about what was said. Could be used for an information gap activity, and then even sort of after listening to a discussion about a topic, have participants in groups record their discussions and then share those with other groups. So I think there's a lot that can be done with there.
Should we go into Q&A? So we've got about 5 minutes left.
Yep.
Yeah. So we prepared some kind of prompt questions which appeared in the video. We'll put those up on the screen. So if you have some ideas that you'd like to share about those questions, please do. If you have any other questions about anything that we've talked about or anything that you saw in the video, then please either put those in the chat or just turn on your microphone and ask us. So we'll open up the floor now to questions from all of you.
Okay. I mean, if there are no questions now, then I guess maybe we can put up the questions that we included in the video, just as a maybe prompt for discussion. I had them on separate pages, but maybe I'll just put them all on the one slide here. So the first question about if you're a podcast user, so I think that means like somebody who listens to podcasts. what aspects of the medium do you find engaging? If any of you create your own podcasts, that's great. Or I guess we also put it in, if you created your own podcasts, how could that production support your own professional development and maybe others? And then sort of going back to that difference I looked at between spoken text and written text, how is engagement with the two different types of text different or maybe similar? And then finally, more general, how might you engage with podcasts as a listener? Yeah, so if anybody has any sort of thoughts or comments on any of those questions. Hello? Yeah.
Yeah, if I can.
Of course.
So I do listen to a lot of podcasts, and I was telling Robert at the beginning when we first started that I've heard a couple of your podcasts and I really enjoyed them. I like the idea of using podcasts to make research more accessible. Have you heard of any movements in that direction, like across the general community of language learning or language teaching?
Matt, do you want to go ahead?
Yeah, sure. So I just started a PhD course, and it's online. The format is it starts with some modules. So we're given a lot of texts and resources to access while we do some research projects. But what was interesting is that the texts, we're given a variety of texts. We're given obviously lots of journal articles to read, but also the professors on the course make videos of themselves talking about topics, and then they'll also often link to podcasts made by the university, other people in the education research section of the university, which I wasn't expecting. So it's, at least in teacher education, there does seem to be, some recognition that podcasts could be an alternative form of text.
Yeah, and sometimes we hear from people who've included our podcast on MA courses, and sometimes we get in 1 week we'll get a bunch of hits to our website which are coming from some universities, the kind of Blackboard software. So there's obviously something going on there, but we can't access it.
And just one other thing I was only recently made aware of, which is I think Taylor and Francis have an option for their free journals that are accessible, or maybe all of them. But there's basically an option on the PDFs of journal articles that they publish to convert it or to download an MP3 version of it.
Oh, wow.
So instead of reading it, you can put it on your smartphone and go out for a walk and listen to it. Yeah. And I imagine that could easily be converted into a podcast stream.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. That is something we've talked about, though, is maybe asking, if we read an article that we're more fond of or we think would, deserves to be more widely shared, even just to contact the author and say, would you like to make a podcast, episode version of this? Would you like to, read it out or I guess, you could adapt it somewhat, but.
Sure. That's a really good idea. Thanks.
Thank you.
Any other questions?
I have about 1 minute to go.
Okay.
I have a question. Go ahead.
Go ahead.
No, it's okay.
I just have a quick question, probably more technical. I'm just thinking I've never done this before, and I heard that there are lots of very interesting, engaging, even funny podcasts out there. And how do people find my academic podcast, which is kind of boring probably? So that's my question.
That's a good question. I think we spent quite a lot of time building our audience. I think that the main thing that people seem to do to get kind of like a big audience is to create some kind of social media profile where they share it, and also to include other voices who will share it on already established profiles. So you get, like I said, we interview researchers, and when the podcast comes out, they're usually quite happy to share it on their own profiles. So that's kind of one way to get people engaged with the podcast. But it takes a while because, as you say, there's like 100 million podcasts. Yeah.
Thank you.
Unfortunately, we are out of time for more questions. I know, Shoko, you said you had a question. If you would like to continue this discussion, you can all move to the Hangout channel on Zoom, and the manager there can put you all into a breakout room, and then you can continue this discussion. So if everyone could please unmute your microphones and join me in thanking Robert and Matthew for an interesting presentation.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, guys. And great video. The video is still up on YouTube. You can access it through the live schedule as well. So it'll be there if you want to follow up. All right, thank you very much, everybody. Enjoy the rest of the conference. And if you have time, stop by the EME and check out our sponsors. Okay, thank you.
Thank you.